So now is the time for Dhamma discussion. So actually, before I came to Toronto, I never really did any Dhamma discussion. You know, kind of it was in the Thai tradition, they don't do a lot of Dhamma discussions, kind of give Dhamma talks. And then if you want to, you can go and approach the person who's, you know, the teacher afterwards. But was kind of very happy actually to come to the Toronto area here and see that kind of in the Sri Lankan community, it's kind of a Dhamma discussion is very strong. You know, kind of, it's kind of one of even people will like advertise a Dhamma discussion, and then people will come to the Dhamma discussion. You know, so this is a good thing. There's kind of four things that the Buddha says kind of culminate in awakening, culminate in nibbana. One is the time for serenity. Another is the time for insight. Another is the time for listening to the Dhamma. And the last one is the time for discussing the Dhamma. So basically the way that a Dhamma discussion works, from what I've seen from the Sri Lankan monks who've conducted, is basically you just ask questions. And then the person, the teacher, or whoever's leading the session will answer those. And it's kind of a nice way to do things. Actually, one of the interesting things, when the Buddha was about to pass away, his last words were, I declare to you all conditioned phenomena are impermanent, achieve completion through heedfulness. But right before his last words, he asked if anybody had any questions. So that kind of shows the importance of asking questions in the practice of meditation, in the practice moving forward on the Buddhist path. And actually, when you see the way that kind of a lot of, the way he would move forward on his own meditation practice, when he describes how he was a kind of unenlightened bodhisattva, he says that, I asked myself, what if I tried this? And then he tried it out. If it didn't work, he'd say, what if I tried this? And if he tried that out, it didn't work. He'd keep asking himself these questions until he hit upon the right answer for the way to move forward. He went to the extremes possible. Of what it's kind of possible to go to, trying to move forward in the practice. So this is a kind of very important thing. It's kind of asking of questions, and actually in doing it, the kind of kamma that one generates is said to be the kamma that leads to intelligence. It's kind of very interesting because oftentimes in the West, at least I know growing up, it was more like debate, kind of you argue with somebody to see, what you can learn from them. But in the Buddhist tradition, it's always about kind of asking questions. So with that in mind, we can do a little bit of a kind of a Dhamma discussion. And if anybody has any questions, I've got one written down here. I don't know if there was any more that I missed, but saw one in the box. But if anybody has any other ones, please feel free to ask. And if not, there's also no pressure to ask questions. We can meditate for an extra long time. Okay? So the first question here is, what are some of the pitfalls to avoid along the path? And so, in terms of pitfalls along the path, there's a lot, right? It's kind of hard to put a number on the number of pitfalls that a person can encounter when they're trying to move forward in wholesome qualities. But largely they fall into pitfalls of three sorts: pitfalls that come from greed, pitfalls that come from hatred, and pitfalls that come from delusion, not knowing. So the pitfalls that come from greed, these ones are kind of light. So you have a pitfall that comes from greed. Usually it's kind of a little bit bad, but it kind of lasts a long time. When greed arises, it's difficult to get rid of. If you have a pitfall that comes from hatred, it's very bad, but it lasts a short time. Tend to, often, not always, but you tend to hate people for, get really angry or whatever, and then, I shouldn't have done that. But if you have a pitfall that comes from delusion, it both is really bad and lasts a really long time. Well, very hard to get rid of. So this is the interesting thing about kind of pitfalls in a person's meditation practice, is that they don't graph like a kind of, a textbook, where you can be like, okay, phase 1, pitfalls are these, phase 2, pitfalls are these. It's kind of like if a person was, say, all of us, for example, in this room, we're all kind of trying to get to, a particular point on the map. And I like to use the CN Tower because I like Toronto, but say everybody's kind of in different places, trying to get to the CN Tower. You know, one person is in Russia, one person is in the United States, one person is, you know, in Toronto, one person's in, you know, Alaska. The kind of, the path that each of these people have to follow is different. And so the pitfalls they're going to encounter are different. And kind of the person in Russia might be going along and encounter the winter, you know. The person who's down in the States might be going along and encounter the Grand Canyon. You know? So in each of these cases, depending on the individual person, they have to kind of be aware of what they're up against. And so this is something that we can basically know for ourselves. We're going along, something happens that we didn't expect, that we aren't too familiar with, that seems to be getting in the way. How do I overcome it? You know, that's basically it. And so this is why the teachers always emphasize this attitude of heedfulness. It's kind of basically being very careful about trying to move forward in skillful qualities. And they emphasize this attitude of effort. It's basically, okay, you know, going along, I hit a pitfall, you know, I might have to kind of go backtrack a bit, come back, you know, I might make a mistake, and then basically trying again. It's basically trying again and again. And then the third one that they often emphasize for overcoming pitfalls is ingenuity. It's this kind of attitude of creativity. So you can see this with the kind of various problems that arise in a person's life. If they try one solution, it doesn't work, it's not like, oh well, there's no solution. It's kind of what if there's another solution this way? You know? What if there's another solution that way? And when a person learns to approach these various pitfalls along the way, in all these different angles, basically not giving up, basically trying again and again, and basically being very careful and very creative about how to overcome them, that's when a person starts to develop a bigger idea of where they are on the path. It's when they start to get a sense of their surroundings. So, you know, for example, just recently this week, have been going down to the Rouge Valley a lot. I kind of really love this kind of Rouge Valley, which is right here, you know. And kind of, it's a decent sized forest, and the trees are really big. It's got a big canopy, and it's very quiet. You know, when you go there, you feel this sense of quietness. But, you know, when you go along all these various paths on the Rouge Valley, the first time you go, you have no clue really, you know, where you're going. You've got an idea that there's paths, and you've got an idea they're going somewhere. But some of those paths lead back to themselves. Some of them go down a hill, you know, right back to the start. Some of them go up really big hills. Some of them actually, you can go into like a kind of dead end area that's just an area, and then there's kind of ravines all around it, and some of them lead out. And so that's the thing. So when a person kind of sets out to get to wander a bit in the Rouge Valley, then just by trial and error, you start to understand, okay, wait a minute, this path led me the wrong way. I better kind of turn around. You turn around, go this way, turn around, go that way. And eventually you start to get a sense of actually the layout, the kind of topography of the Rouge Valley just by kind of wandering in there. And so actually, you know, when you go in there, it's got this big hill. That's one of the things to know. It has this big hill, and then to the right side of the hill is this creek, to the left side is another creek, and then it kind of goes here, and there's this big ridge, and the ridge goes along, and then the creek goes like this and turns this way. And so then the path crosses the creek and keeps going up and goes to the zoo. And so once you have an idea of the topography, it's a lot easier to understand intuitively when you're starting to go wrong. It's kind of when you just start out wandering in the Rouge Valley the very first time, and like all the paths kind of look the same. It's going, oh, whatever, it's trees, it's a path. But when you start to keep going on them, you get an idea of the layout of the Rouge Valley. And then you may still take a kind of wrong turn. You kind of may find a path that leads to a dead end, but at least you have an idea of where you are and where you're going. And it's the same way with kind of moving forward in one's practice, and kind of moving forward in one's meditation practice. There's a topography to the mind. There's a layout to the way that defilements arise, to the way that skillful qualities arise. And when a person starts wandering there with these three things in mind, they might hit a dead end sometimes. They might have to turn around sometimes. But so long as they keep going, they get an idea of the layout. And once they have this idea of the layout, it's much easier for them to identify wrong paths earlier on. It's much easier for them to identify right paths earlier on. So in terms of some of the pitfalls, probably the main one along the path is basically just giving up. It's kind of, deciding for oneself that one doesn't want to move forward, or deciding for oneself that, it's impossible to move forward, or deciding for oneself that it's not worthwhile to move forward. These are probably the biggest pitfalls I think people in the West at least, might face. Because in the West at this time, meditation is basically, it's therapeutic, which is fine. It's kind of therapeutic in the sense, okay, try to get some meditation going so it can get back to, my regular life, get back to partying. And this is kind of one way that it can be used. It can be used that way. But when a person just has this kind of attitude, they will stop their progress along the path. It's kind of very easy when meditation stops being pleasant, stops being easy, just kind of give it up. When advancing in wholesome qualities stops being easy, I've kind of gone far enough. Or, some difficulty it comes up, it's not possible for me to do this. I don't have the parami, I don't have the good karma to do this. In this way, a person doesn't learn the layout, the topography. They don't have this kind of attitude of going forward, and they don't have the attitude of trying to come up with new solutions, kind of creative solutions when the ones they've already tried don't work. So, I'm sure there's many pitfalls, but in terms of the three, the main ones that at least that come to mind would probably be just giving up. Stop trying to go forward. Stop believing that it's worthwhile.